Now in this video, I want to show you what it's like to create a small game with Unity. Now we will create the game Flappy Nerd, and we will use some basic techniques and work with Unity already, and it will be pretty overwhelming. But anyways, I want you to have a small victory right at the start of the course, so you know what you're working towards. Now, if you feel up to the challenge, I want to invite you to join me in creating this game. Now, you just have to follow the same steps that I take, and that way you already have your very own first Flappy Bird-like game. Isn't that quite a treat? Now, due to the fact that this is our first project, I will guide you through the project creation workflow. However, I will skip this in the future projects. Now, in the Unity Hub, you create a new project, and then this is important, you select 2D core. Then we select our project name, and this will be Flappy Nerd, and select the location. I will put it on my desktop. You choose a location that's appropriate for you. Create project, and this will take a few minutes. All right, so we are now in Unity, and the first thing that we are going to do is we import the resources that I want to provide you with. So you can download 2 images from the course materials, and we will put them into Unity. Now to do that, we right-click down here, select Create, and then Folder, and we'll call it Art. So this is where the art assets of our project will get into. Now I will open this folder now, and I will go to the resources, and you can see here I've got the nerd and the tile, and I will select them and drag them into Unity and in here. And now I have them in Unity. All right, so now let's look at the editor itself. Now, what you can see in here, this is the so-called scene view. So this is basically your level, okay? Now, if you have multiple levels in your game, you might have multiple scenes. Now, if you press this tab, this is the game view. So this is what the player would see. And if we look at the scene, you can see here is a camera, and I can now drag my nerd in here somewhere. And if I now switch to the game view, I can see the nerd here. It's really tiny, so that's a little problem. Now, how I can fix this is I go to the Explorer again, and I look at this asset, and if I click on the properties and details, I can see it's 24 by 24 pixels. So what I want to do now is when I press on this asset here, I can set the pixels per unit to 24 pixels, press apply down here. And now this nerd fills 1 unit. So it's a little bit bigger and it's already far better. But as you can see, it's kind of blurry, and we need to fix that also. And this is already some in-depth techniques in Unity. So I select both of my assets, and in here on the filter mode, I switch from bilinear to point. Press apply, and immediately you can see it's now way more crisp, and I think it looks far better that way. So yeah, that's the first few steps already taken. And now I could already create a little level. You can see here I forgot to switch the bricks pixels per unit setting. So let's check the brick also. If I click right, properties, details, I can see it's 18 by 18 pixels large. So let me just put this to 18. And now if I put a brick in here, that's far better. So that way I can already create a level. Now I can duplicate these tiles by pressing Ctrl C and then Ctrl V. And that way you can see I can drag those tiles so I can create a narrow corridor where my nerd needs to go through. Another neat trick, if you hold Control, you can see it snaps. So if I don't hold Control, I can move it completely free, but in this case, I find snapping a little bit better. So yeah, now we have a little level already. So the next thing that we want to do is we want our nerd to collide with those walls. Because right now you can see it can move right through those walls, and that's not how the game should work. Now let's select the nerd here. Now also what you should keep in mind is this is the so-called hierarchy. This is basically all the objects that are in your scene, so in your level. And this is our player, nerd. Now, in order to make him collide with those walls, we need to add a component. And this is the next section that we need to look at. So these are the objects that are in our scene, and each object has components on it. And the components determine what the object can and cannot do. Now, in this case, our nerd only has a sprite renderer and a transform component. The transform component says where it is positioned, how it is rotated, and how big it is. And the renderer determines which sprite or which asset is painted on the screen. So if I switch this component on and off, you can see it is painted or it is not painted on the screen. Now, in order to make my character collide, I need to add a component called collider. And I will use a circle collider 2D. Now, we're going to only create 2D games in this course, so you really have to make certain you only use the 2D variants of those colliders. So if we add a circle collider 2D, you can see there is now this green circle around our player. And this means it can now collide with something. However, our walls don't collide with anything. So let me select all of my walls. You can hold down the Shift key and select all of them and add the component box collider 2D. Now if I click here, we can see those things also now have this green outline. And now in theory, we could think that it already collides, but we can still move through it. That's because we still need one more component. That is the rigid body 2D. And we add this component also. And now it should actually work. Now, let me just make a small adjustment here. I set the gravity scale to 0. This means that it is not affected by the gravity at all. Now, if I move the character in here, it can still move through. And that's because we are still in edit mode. Now, collisions only happen if we are in play mode. So let's hit play. And now you can see this is how the game would look. What I usually do, I put the game somewhere to the right, and to the left I have kind of my editor. To the right I can see what the player would see. Now if I move the player now to the right, you can see it is colliding. So it is pushed outside if I drag it in here. So now we have already collisions in our game. And don't worry, I know this is very much for the beginning. We will look at all of this in far more detail so you can understand it better. Okay, so now this is just to have a look at what game development might feel like. So let's undo this thing that I did earlier. I set the gravity scale to 0. Now let's set it back to 1 and press play and see what happens. Now my player falls down. So I mean, that's to be expected because now it's affected by the gravity, which is neat. So yeah, the collider is responsible for determining in which radius or in which position something can collide. And the rigid body component is responsible for kind of telling the Unity engine that this game object should be affected by physics. And if neither of those two objects has a rigid body, no collision will occur because it is ignored by the physics engine. Now, this is still not necessarily how we want our game to work. We want our nerd to be able to flap his wings. So he should jump up, kind of like in Flappy Bird. So in order to do that, we need to write our own code. And we'll do that in the next video.